assume the economic and health risks of doing business, and a hypermobile gig economy is eclipsing more stable ways of working. The difference here is, as ACE suggests, sex, and that difference brings both particular vulnerabilities and resources. Intensified state violence and stigma on the one hand, and the potential for pleasureful refusal on the other. The new economy is not new. Porn workers have been living in it for decades. They have found ways to hack and reshape its conditions for as long. Against the scholarly tendency to treat porn as a text and the wage relation as a given, porn work centers on workers' creative approaches to class struggle. This is another place in which porn work is not quite like straight jobs. Workers here are often craftier than those in straight jobs, and have a less romantic analysis of work under capitalism. Their ways of intervening in it are not always transformative. Sometimes intervening means ascending hierarchies rather than dismantling them. But they do highlight the contradictions and the stakes. A porn work lens makes for a sharper anti-capitalist feminist critique, not just a more inclusive one. Porno dialectics. Habib's position on the work question would shift in the years after our first meeting, and he would become more interested in craftily appropriating the language of sex work than rejecting it. As long as we misuse work, we can erode it, he later said. Porn workers are experts at this kind of misuse. Breaking the fundamental rule of waged work, they sometimes take more from the job than it takes from them. Both nimbly responding to current working conditions and inventing new ways of working, they use porn work toward their own ends. This book explores these dynamics through interviews with 81 porn performers, managers, and crew members. Interviewees spoke to their experience of working across porn's genres, from big-budget mainstream to low-budget amateur productions, and in gay, straight mainstream, and queer and feminist production communities, from the 1970s until the late 2010s. Most were current workers when we interviewed in the 2010s, and this book focuses on their strategies for intervening in present conditions. Feminist researcher activists, Precarious a la Deriva, ground their research on precarious workers in these questions. What is your precarity? What is your strike? This book shares these primary concerns. Its political commitments flown from related questions: what changes would mitigate that precarity? What shifts could facilitate that strike? Following Precarious a la Deriva, I am interested in precarity as a tendency toward uncertainty, work and life experiences in permanent construction, and, crucially, a tendency that should be understood not just as a liability, but also as a source of craftiness and alternative vision. Sex workers are fierce fighters, writes Melinda Chateauvert, because their jobs demand perspicacity. Conditions that grind can also sharpen our teeth. Porn work draws from an expansive archive of struggle. In spite of multiple barriers to organizing, their independent contractor status, the itinerant nature of the work, fierce competition for castings, and the threat of retaliation, porn performers have for decades engaged in collective action. They have formed worker groups modeled on labor unions and ones focused on education and mutual support. Porn workers intervene in more subtle ways, too, manipulating the conditions of porn work to maximize earning potential, resist burnout, and otherwise exert control over their work lives. They develop creative strategies for navigating emotional intimacy. They figure out ways to manage managers, negotiating working conditions in an atmosphere loaded with gendered and racist hierarchy. They learn to perform intense physical labor while minimizing its toll on the body. They make independent contractor status work to their benefit by producing, and hence reaping profits from, their own material.